Hello everyone, and welcome back to Spooky Hut. I know many of you listen to these videos to help you fall asleep, so before you doze off, it would be great if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. If you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Now let's get cozy, relax, and get started. Whatever you've heard about the dark web doesn't even scratch the surface. The things you see there, they stick to your mind, they rot it slowly. I thought I could handle it, that it was all just twisted stories and cheap thrills. I was wrong. Some things should never be seen, and some doors should never be opened. My name is Marcus Langley, 27 years old, and this happened 2 years ago. I lived alone in a small apartment in Philadelphia, working night shifts as an IT technician. The solitude never bothered me. I liked being alone. My job gave me access to servers, networks, and parts of the internet most people wouldn't know exist. I knew how to move around online, how to avoid getting caught, and how to stay hidden. That's why I let my curiosity get the best of me. The dark web had always been this forbidden place, something you heard whispered about but never saw for yourself. People claimed it was a myth, a labyrinth of depravity that wasn't worth exploring. I ignored those warnings because I thought I was smarter than everyone else. I thought the stories were overblown, urban legends created to scare kids into behaving. That night, I found out how wrong I was. It started as boredom. I was sifting through hidden forums, shadowy sites that most browsers would never index. I wasn't looking for anything illegal, just the usual oddities. Abandoned marketplaces, conspiracy theory message boards, maybe some weird art installations. It was around 2 a.m. when I stumbled across a link posted by an anonymous user. The thread title said, "Watch at your own risk. Once you see, it's too late." Most replies in the thread were jokes or people calling the poster a troll, but one user's comment stood out to me. It said, "Don't open it. I watched. It knows me now." That should have been enough to make me stop, but it wasn't. Curiosity, or maybe something darker, drove me forward. I clicked on the link. It led to a plain black page with a single video player in the center. The site had no name, no menu, nothing else. The video had no title, no description, just a timer at the bottom. 0000. For a moment, I hesitated. Then, I hit play. The video started with darkness, total silence. It looked like someone had forgotten to turn on the camera. I thought it might be a prank, but then I heard it. A faint, distorted noise. At first, it was just static, but it grew louder, like a scream being played in reverse. My stomach knotted up as the screen flickered. A dim room appeared. I could barely make it out. It was filthy, filled with broken furniture and rotting wallpaper. A figure stood in the center of the room, facing away from the camera. It looked human, but something about its posture was wrong. It was too rigid, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. It wasn't moving. It just stood there, breathing loudly, a wet, rattling sound that I could hear through my headphones. I leaned closer to the screen. The figure's shoulders twitched. Then it turned. Its face... God, I still see it in my nightmares. It was as if someone had tried to sculpt a human face from clay but gave up halfway through. Its skin was stretched too tight, its mouth pulled into a jagged smile that didn't belong. The eyes were the worst, black pits that seemed to see me, even through the screen. I froze, paralyzed by some primal terror. The figure moved closer to the camera, step by step, until its face filled the screen. It didn't blink. It didn't stop smiling, and then it spoke. Or, no, it didn't speak. The words just appeared in my head. "I see you." I yanked off my headphones and slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding. I could still hear it breathing in my ears, even though the video was off. My apartment felt different, like the air had thickened, the walls pressing in closer. I stood up and paced the room, telling myself it was just a video, a stupid dark web hoax designed to scare people. But the longer I stood there, the less I believed that, because I felt it. Something was in the room with me. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. I turned slowly to face the laptop, and a cold chill crept down my spine. The screen was still closed, but the faint sound of breathing came from inside it. That's impossible, I thought. My heart raced. I grabbed the laptop, shoved it into my backpack, and bolted from the apartment. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I just ran. I ended up in a 24-hour diner a few blocks away, trembling and pouring sweat. The waitress asked if I was okay, but I couldn't even answer her. I sat there until sunrise, my laptop sitting on the seat beside me like a ticking bomb. The breathing had stopped, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. I didn't trust it anymore. I didn't trust anything. By the next day, I was trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. I was sleep-deprived, my mind playing tricks on me. That's what I told myself as I carried the laptop to my car, intending to drive out of town and dump it somewhere far away. I got halfway to the city limits before my phone buzzed, a notification. New message. Unknown sender. I pulled over, hands shaking, and unlocked my phone. The message contained a single word. Look. Then my phone screen glitched. The same black pits for eyes, the same jagged smile. I dropped it like it burned me. My ears started ringing. A shrill, unbearable sound that grew louder and louder. I clamped my hands over my ears and screamed. And then it stopped. The phone went dark. The car was silent. I looked out the window and saw nothing but empty road and woods stretching into the distance. Except, not empty. In the rearview mirror, a figure stood on the roadside, still, watching, smiling. I don't remember driving back to the city. I don't remember much after that. I threw the laptop and phone into a dumpster and spent the next 2 nights sleeping in my car, too afraid to go home. When I finally did return, my apartment felt wrong, like whatever I'd seen had seeped into the walls. The breathing never really went away. Some nights, I hear it, faint and wet, coming from the corners of the room. I've changed apartments twice since then, but it doesn't matter. Wherever I go, it follows me. I don't use computers anymore. I don't own a phone. I can't risk seeing it again. People ask why I look so tired, why I've become a paranoid recluse. I just smile and tell them I don't sleep well. But the truth is, I'm afraid of what will happen if I close my eyes for too long. I'm afraid of where I'll wake up, because sometimes when it's late and quiet, I hear the words echo in my head. Words I never want to hear again. I see you. If you're reading this, if you ever see that link, don't click it. Some doors once opened can't be closed again. I should know. I'm still trying to close mine. I never used to believe in ghosts. Growing up, I thought stories about haunted places were for thrill seekers or kids trying to scare each other at sleepovers. I used to laugh at movies where characters would willingly walk into graveyards at night, as if daring the dead to wake up. But sometimes, life has a way of humbling you, of peeling back the thin curtain between the living and the dead. I learned this firsthand. And no matter how much time passes, I'll never forget what happened to me. It started with a dare. A stupid, reckless dare. My name is James Morton. I'm 29 years old, originally from New Jersey, and I work as a freelance travel blogger. Last fall, a friend in the industry challenged me to visit some of the most haunted graveyards in the USA and the UK. To spice up my blog, he said. People eat that spooky stuff up around Halloween. They love graveyards and ghost stories. I rolled my eyes at first. I was never a fan of the paranormal, but the truth is, I needed content. My site had plateaued, and I was desperate for traffic. So with a camera, a journal, and an overconfident attitude, I planned a trip that would take me to 5 of the most haunted graveyards across 2 countries. What I didn't know then was that this decision would change my life and leave me with nightmares I can't shake. New Orleans is a city brimming with history, and its cemeteries are no exception. St. Louis Cemetery. Number 1, in particular, is famous for its above-ground tombs and its most notorious resident, Marie Laveau, the Voodoo Queen. It's said her spirit still lingers, granting wishes or cursing those who dare to disturb her grave. I arrived on a humid October evening, just as the sun dipped behind the skyline. The cemetery was closed to the public, but I had paid for an after-hours ghost tour, a perk for my blog readers. Our guide was an older man named Victor who had that deep Louisiana drawl and a face that looked like it had seen too much. "Stay close to me, folks," Victor said, leading us through narrow rows of crumbling tombs. "And whatever you do, don't touch the graves," I scoffed under my breath, half listening as I snapped photos. It was eerie, sure, but I was more focused on composing shots than looking for ghosts. The real scare didn't happen until we reached Marie Laveau's tomb, a large white structure covered in offerings, candles, coins, and strange little trinkets. "Make a wish," Victor said, "but be careful what you ask for. Some folks say the Voodoo Queen doesn't take kindly to fools." I stepped closer, feeling an inexplicable heaviness in the air. On a whim, I muttered under my breath, "Prove to me you're real." The second the words left my mouth, the temperature dropped. I swear I could see my breath, even in the Louisiana heat. I turned to walk back to the group, but I stopped cold. Behind me, I heard a shuffling sound, a dragging noise, like someone pulling their feet through gravel. I spun around, shining my flashlight across the tombs. Nothing. The group was already walking away, Victor at the front. I hurried to catch up, trying to shake the feeling that someone was watching me. That night in my hotel, I dreamed of Marie Laveau's tomb. In my dream, I stood before it again, but this time I wasn't alone. A figure in a tattered black dress stood beside me, her face obscured. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I woke up drenched in sweat, the sound of dragging footsteps echoing in my head. A week later, I landed in London, my mind still restless from New Orleans. My next stop was Highgate Cemetery, a sprawling Victorian graveyard famous for its Gothic tombs and vampire legends. If St. Louis Cemetery felt claustrophobic, Highgate was like stepping into a haunted forest. Vines twisted around gravestones, and the towering trees blocked out most of the daylight. I wandered alone this time, no tours, just me and my camera. I had read about a particular pathway known as the Circle of Lebanon, where people claimed to see shadowy figures darting between the mausoleums. As I made my way down the overgrown path, I felt it again, that sense of being watched. I stopped to take a photo of a massive stone angel, its wings chipped and weathered. Through my camera lens, I saw something move behind the statue, a shadow, darker than anything else. I lowered the camera and squinted into the gloom. Nothing. I shook my head, annoyed at myself for getting spooked. But as I turned to leave, I heard a whisper. It wasn't English. It wasn't even human. It was low, guttural, like the rasp of something that hadn't spoken in centuries. I froze, my blood running cold. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. Then, from behind me, a crash, like stone grinding against stone. I bolted. I ran so fast I didn't stop until I was outside the cemetery gates. Gasping for breath, I glanced back. The path was empty, but the angel statue, it looked different. I could have sworn its head had turned to face me. By the time I reached Edinburgh, I was exhausted, but determined to finish what I started. Greyfriars Kirkyard is infamous for its Mackenzie poltergeist, said to be the vengeful spirit of George Mackenzie, a 17th century persecutor of the Covenanters. Visitors reported scratches, bruises, and violent attacks after encountering his mausoleum. I visited on a misty evening, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. Mackenzie's tomb sat at the far end of the graveyard, a large stone structure with an iron gate. I approached cautiously, feeling the air grow heavier with every step. I stood at the gate, peering inside. It was dark, but my flashlight revealed a stone coffin in the center of the room. I lifted my camera to take a photo, and just as I clicked the shutter, something slammed into the gate from the other side. Bang! I jumped back, my heart hammering. I shone my flashlight through the bars, but there was nothing there. The cemetery was silent again. I told myself it was probably an animal, but I knew it wasn't. That night, back in my hotel, I woke up to find 3 long scratches down my arm. I hadn't been scratched earlier, I hadn't touched anything, I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Bachelor's Grove is a small, abandoned cemetery near Chicago, infamous for ghost sightings, particularly a woman in white who wanders among the graves. By this point, I was ready to call the whole thing off, but I had one stop left. I arrived just before sunset. The place was overgrown and eerily quiet. I wandered among the broken tombstones, snapping photos and feeling jumpy at every little sound. That's when I saw her. In the distance, near a pond, a woman in a white dress stood with her back to me. Her hair hung long and black, and she didn't move. My first thought was that someone else was here, but the cemetery was empty. I called out, "Hello?" No response. Slowly, she turned to face me, and I froze. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were black voids. She tilted her head as if curious, and started walking toward me. I ran. I ran so hard I tripped over a gravestone and hit the ground. When I looked back, she was gone, but I could still hear her soft footsteps, following me all the way to my car. I never finished that blog series. I deleted all the photos, trashed the videos. Whatever I had stirred up, I didn't want to share it. To this day, I still hear whispers in the dark, dragging footsteps that follow me when I'm alone. I don't believe in ghosts anymore, because I know they're real. I was there when he disappeared. One moment he was standing right next to me, and the next, he was just gone. It's been 10 years, and I've never stopped looking for answers. Maybe you'll believe me. Maybe you won't. But I'll start from the beginning. My name is Ethan Graves, and this happened in 2013, when I was 28 years old. I grew up in a small, unremarkable town in northern Colorado South called Mayford. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody and secrets don't stay buried for long, or at least that's what I thought. At the time, I was working as a groundskeeper for Mayford State Park. It's a sprawling place, miles of dense forest, crisscrossing trails, and a quiet lake that mirrored the skies like glass on still days. A popular destination in the summer, but during spring or fall, it was eerily quiet. That's how it was the day Lucas Miller vanished. I still remember the sounds, wind rustling through pine trees, the distant croak of frogs near the lake. It was as if nature had decided to hum a soft lullaby. Lucas was my best friend. We'd been inseparable since high school, hunting trips, camping weekends, or just knocking back beers by the lake. That day, he'd convinced me to explore the Overlook Trail, a remote path deep in the woods that park officials warned against using. It had been closed for years, ever since a hiker went missing back in the early 2000s. I didn't want to go. But Lucas always had a way of talking me into things. "Come on, man. You work here. What's the worst that can happen?" Turns out, the worst was more than I could have ever imagined. We set off around 11 a.m., with clear skies overhead and our backpacks loaded with snacks, water, and a compass. The trail started innocent enough, a narrow path bordered by towering trees, their thick canopies swallowing the sun. About an hour in, things began to feel off. I can't explain it any better than that. It wasn't any one thing. It was everything. The silence became too heavy, as if the woods themselves were listening. The sunlight filtering through the trees seemed duller, as though the forest were sucking the life out of it. At one point, Lucas stopped and turned to me. "You feel that?" "Feel what?" I asked, scanning the trees. He shrugged. "I don't know, like we're being watched." I laughed it off, even though I felt it too. We're just psyching ourselves out, I thought. That's what happens when you venture into places that don't want to be found. We pushed deeper into the woods. By noon, we reached the overlook. A wide, flat rock formation perched on the edge of a steep drop. From up there, you could see the entire forest stretched out like a sea of green. Lucas whooped. "This view was worth it, man. Told you." I nodded, wiping sweat from my brow as I dropped my pack. "All right, fair point." We stood there in silence for a few minutes, soaking it in. Then Lucas pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. That's when it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Lucas freeze. He was staring at something on his phone screen, unblinking, mouth slightly open. "Hey, what's up?" I asked, walking toward him. He didn't respond. "Lucas?" I grabbed his shoulder, and just as he turned to look at me, he disappeared. There was no sound, no flash of light. He didn't fall. He didn't scream. It was like something had plucked him out of existence. One moment he was standing right there, and the next, there was just empty space where my best friend had been. I froze. The world felt warped, unreal. I blinked over and over, trying to process what had just happened. My mind kept racing through explanations. He fell. He ran. He's playing a prank on me. But there was nowhere for him to fall. Nowhere for him to hide. The overlook was open and flat. I screamed his name, my voice echoing into the vast nothingness of the valley below. "Lucas!" Nothing. My heart pounded. My legs felt weak. I searched everywhere, scrambling across the overlook, peering into the trees, even crawling to the edge of the drop to look below. Lucas was gone. At some point, I realized my hands were shaking uncontrollably. I fumbled for my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I was miles deep into the forest, on a closed trail no one else used. I don't know how long I stayed there, shouting Lucas's name, before something strange happened. The air around me shifted. That's the only way I can describe it. The temperature dropped suddenly, like stepping into a freezer. My breath fogged in front of me, and then I heard something. A faint whisper. It came from the trees behind me. I turned, every muscle in my body tensed. The woods were dense and dark, but I saw nothing. Then I heard it again, a hushed, almost melodic voice. "Ethan." It was Lucas's voice. I can't explain the terror that gripped me at that moment. My brain told me it couldn't be him, but it was his voice. "Lucas," I whispered. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Ethan, help me." I stumbled backward, shaking my head. "No, where are you? Lucas." The whisper turned into something else, a low guttural sound, like the growl of some thing imitating Lucas's voice. It echoed around me, bouncing off the trees. "Ethan." Then I saw it. At the edge of the trees stood a pale figure. It was tall and thin, its body unnaturally elongated, almost stretched. Its face, I still have nightmares about its face. It was a blank, smooth surface, like clay that hadn't been finished. But it spoke. "Help me." I don't remember running, but I must have. I tore through the forest, branches whipping against my face and arms. I sprinted for what felt like hours, blind with panic, until finally I stumbled back onto one of the main trails. Some rangers found me shortly after that, collapsed near the path, rambling about Lucas and the figure in the woods. They searched for days. Helicopters, dogs, volunteers. Everyone in town came together to find him. They found nothing. Not a trace of Lucas. No footprints. No signs of a struggle. It was as if he'd never been there at all. The official report said he was likely the victim of an accident, maybe a fall. But I knew better. I saw what happened. I felt it. The worst part? Lucas wasn't the first person to vanish in those woods. Over the decades, people, hikers, campers, even kids, had disappeared without a trace, all in the same remote area. The locals called it the Hollow. I never went back to Mayford after that. I packed up my things and moved to the city. But even there, I wasn't free. Sometimes I still hear the whispers at night. When I'm alone in the dark, I hear Lucas's voice calling my name. Ethan, I don't answer. I won't. Because I know it's not him. They say some places in this world aren't meant for us. Places where the veil between our reality and something else is thin. I think Mayford State Park is one of those places. Maybe Lucas got too close. Maybe he stepped into whatever lies on the other side. Or maybe something reached out and took him. Whatever the truth is, one thing is certain. People don't just vanish, not without a reason, and some things are better left alone. There are places on this earth where the walls still whisper secrets. Places that refuse to die, even when they're long abandoned. Old mental asylums are the worst of them. I'd always heard the stories. Rumors of tortured souls, cruel experiments, and screams echoing through empty halls. But like most people, I chalked it up to folklore. That was until I visited Fairhaven Asylum. I'll never forget the date, October 13th, Friday night. My friends called it the perfect night for ghost hunting. In hindsight, I should have never gone. My name is Daniel. I'm 26 years old and I live in a small town in upstate New York. Growing up, Fairhaven Asylum was a local legend. Perched on a hill, the enormous brick structure loomed like a forgotten monster. It had been closed since the 1960s after allegations of abuse, neglect, and mysterious deaths had shut it down. People said the patients never really left. They just lingered in the shadows, waiting. I never took those stories seriously. But that night, peer pressure did its job. My friend Tyler had this bright idea of sneaking into the asylum to explore. He'd just bought a new camera and wanted to make a spooky video for his YouTube channel. "Come on, Dan," he said. "What's the worst that could happen?" Ghosts aren't real. There were 4 of us, me, Tyler, his cousin Ben, and Sarah. Sarah was the skeptic, the voice of reason, but even she couldn't resist the challenge. "We go in for an hour, get some footage, and leave," she told us. Easy, right? We arrived at Fairhaven just after midnight. The asylum looked worse up close. Cracked windows, sagging doors, and vines crawling up the brick like they were trying to choke the life out of it. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of mildew and rot. It felt wrong. It felt alive. Tyler broke through a side window, and one by one, we crawled inside. I landed in what used to be the main lobby. My flashlight beam revealed peeling wallpaper, shattered glass, and overturned furniture covered in dust. A broken chandelier dangled precariously above us. "You guys hear that?" Ben whispered. We stopped. The silence was suffocating, but then I heard it too. A faint creaking sound, like footsteps on a distant floorboard. I told myself it was just the building settling. After all, it was old. "Let's keep moving," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, but her grip on the flashlight was white-knuckled. We wandered through darkened hallways, our footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. Tyler filmed everything, narrating like a wannabe ghost hunter. "This is the East Wing," he said, pointing the camera at faded plaques on the walls. "This is where they kept the violent patients." I glanced at a doorway labeled Ward C. The heavy metal door was ajar, its hinges rusted and broken. Against my better judgment, I peeked inside. The room was small and empty, save for a rusted bed frame and something scrawled on the wall in dark, smeared letters. "We never left." "What the hell?" I muttered. My breath fogged the air as a sudden chill swept over me. I stepped back. Guys, I think we should go, Sarah said behind me. Her voice sounded different, strained, like she was holding her breath. Tyler laughed. Relax, Sarah. It's just graffiti. But then Ben pointed his flashlight down the hall, and we all froze. At the far end of the corridor stood a figure. It was faint, just a silhouette, but unmistakable. It looked like a person, thin, impossibly tall, and perfectly still. My throat tightened as I watched it. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. Who's that? Ben whispered. No one answered. Tyler raised his camera, but before he could focus, the figure shifted. It was subtle, a slight tilt of the head, but it made my blood run cold. We need to leave, I said, louder this time. Tyler ignored me. He stepped forward, aiming his camera down the hall. Hello? He called out. His voice echoed back to us. The figure twitched. It started walking toward us. I grabbed Tyler's arm. Run! For a second, no one moved. Then the figure broke into a sprint. We bolted, tripping over debris and shoving each other to get away. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would explode. I heard footsteps pounding behind us, faster than ours, inhumanly fast. I didn't dare look back. We ducked into a stairwell, slamming the door shut behind us. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening. The footsteps stopped. Silence. What was that? Ben hissed, panting. I don't know, I gasped. It wasn't human. Tyler stared at his camera, his hands shaking. I think I got it on video, he said, but it's gone now. We sat there for a moment, catching our breath. Then Sarah pointed to the stairs. We need to go up, that thing's down here. I didn't want to move, but staying put wasn't an option. We climbed the steps, each one creaking beneath our weight. The second floor was worse. The air was colder, and a strange buzzing sound filled my ears. The hallway stretched out before us, lined with doors that seemed to go on forever. Just stick together, Sarah said softly. We crept forward, passing open rooms filled with broken furniture and rusted medical equipment. In one room, I saw what looked like a wheelchair facing the corner. The longer I stared at it, the more I felt like someone was sitting in it, watching me. Suddenly, Ben stopped. Do you hear that? We listened. From somewhere ahead came a faint sound, a woman's voice, humming a lullaby. That's it, I said, backing up. I'm done, we're leaving. But Tyler was already walking toward the sound. We're so close, just a little further. Tyler, Sarah called, but he ignored her. We didn't want to split up, so we followed him. The humming grew louder as we approached a room at the end of the hall. The door was closed, but a soft light glowed from underneath it. Tyler reached for the handle. Don't, I whispered. He opened the door. The room was empty. There was no woman, no source of the light, nothing. Just four walls and a single chair in the center of the floor. Where's it coming from? Tyler muttered. He stepped inside, aiming his camera at the chair, and then the door slammed shut. Tyler! We screamed, pounding on the door. I heard him yelling from the other side, but it was muffled, like he was underwater. Help me! He cried. Suddenly the humming started again, louder than before. It surrounded us, echoing through the walls. Then it stopped. The door creaked open by itself. The room was empty. Tyler was gone. We searched for him for hours, but it was like he'd vanished. His camera lay on the chair, still recording. I picked it up and looked at the screen. There was footage. Tyler standing in the room, staring into the lens. His expression was blank, his mouth slightly open. Behind him, a shadow moved. A tall figure with no face, creeping closer. Tyler didn't react. He just kept staring into the camera as the figure wrapped long, thin fingers around his shoulders and whispered something in his ear. The screen cut to static. We never found Tyler. The police searched Fairhaven, but there was no trace of him. Ben, Sarah, and I told them everything, but no one believed us. They said he must have run off, but I know the truth. Something took him. Sometimes I hear humming when I'm alone at night. And sometimes when I dream, I see the figure, tall, thin, and waiting. Fairhaven Asylum still stands on that hill, its walls whispering secrets to anyone foolish enough to listen. But I'll never go back. Ever. I didn't believe in monsters until I met one. This story isn't polished, it isn't fiction, it's something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it, years later. I'm not even sure why I'm posting this. Maybe it's the late night silence, the shadows in my room that seem darker than usual. Or maybe, just maybe, it's because someone out there needs to know. You're not imagining the thing in the corner. I'll start with the basics. My name's Alex, and this happened when I was 24 years old. I was living alone in a small one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of a quiet Midwestern town. My place was cheap because, frankly, no one wanted to live there. The building was old, and there were a million little signs of decay, peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, drafty windows. But what unnerved me the most was the layout. The living room window faced an empty field, and beyond that field was a dense patch of woods. No streetlights, no houses, just darkness. It was a Reddit thread, ironically, that made me think of all this. A thread titled, "What's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you?" I used to read those stories at 2 a.m., convinced they were entertainment and nothing else. Words on a screen that couldn't hurt me. But now, I don't scroll past those threads so casually anymore, because my own story could have been one of them. It started subtly. I'd wake up to find the living room window cracked open, even though I never opened it. My apartment was drafty enough already, and the locks were so old that they barely held. Still, I dismissed it. Maybe I hadn't latched it properly, maybe the wind shook it loose. Then I started hearing noises. At first, I thought it was the building settling, a tapping sound that would come and go. But soon, the taps turned into something else entirely. It wasn't random, it was rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Always late at night, always from the direction of the woods. One night I stood by the window and squinted into the darkness, trying to see anything. I couldn't. The field was just a black void, and the woods were even worse, but then, tap, tap, tap. It came again. I felt my stomach drop. The sound wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from directly below my window. I froze. My apartment was on the second floor. There was nothing below my window except air. I slept with the lights on that night. Over the next week, things escalated. The tapping was every night now. I tried ignoring it. I blasted music in my headphones and kept my curtains drawn tight, but ignoring something doesn't make it disappear. In fact, it makes it bolder. One night, I made the mistake of peeking through the curtains. I didn't see anything at first, just the usual blackness. But as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were footprints in the field below, just barely visible in the moonlight, and they weren't moving toward the woods. They were moving away from them. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to hide where it came from. It was showing me. I felt nauseous. I didn't sleep that night either. I went online the next day and searched for logical explanations. Animals maybe, someone playing a prank. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how impossible it was. I considered calling the cops, but what would I tell them? That my window was mysteriously opening and I heard tapping at night. That I saw footprints. I already knew what would happen. They'd come by, take a quick look, and tell me to stop watching scary movies. So I did nothing. I wish I hadn't. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of my front door handle jiggling. I shot upright in bed. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again. A slow, deliberate jiggling, like someone was testing the lock. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and crept toward the door, my heart slamming in my chest. I couldn't hear anything now except my own breathing. My apartment was dead silent. I stood frozen in the dark for what felt like forever, bat raised. Then I heard a new sound, a whisper, right outside my door. I couldn't make out the words, but it was low and raspy, like someone trying to speak through a broken throat. My stomach flipped, and I did the only thing I could think of. I shouted, "I'm calling the cops." The whispering stopped. Everything went quiet. I held my breath, straining to hear anything, a footstep, a creak, anything. But there was nothing, just silence. After what felt like hours, I finally gathered enough courage to check the peephole. My hallway was empty. I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, I did call the cops. A polite but disinterested officer came by and listened to my story. He took a brief look around the apartment, checked the locks, and shrugged. "Probably just a drunk or a neighbor messing with you," he said. "But I heard whispering," I insisted. The officer gave me a look that said, "Sure you did." And that was that. Before he left, though, he paused in the doorway. "You might want to get those locks replaced," he said casually. "Old ones like these can pop open pretty easy if someone really wants to get in." I nodded numbly. He didn't understand. No one did. The next night was the worst. I didn't hear any tapping, any jiggling, or any whispering. I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. I let myself relax for the first time in days. And then, at 3:17 a.m., I woke up. Not to a sound, not to a noise. I woke up because I felt something. Someone was in the room with me. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there. I could feel it, a presence so heavy it was suffocating. I didn't dare move. I barely breathed. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought it might give me away. For what felt like an eternity, I lay there in the dark, paralyzed with terror. I could hear nothing, see nothing, but I knew I wasn't alone. And then, slowly, so slowly, the bed creaked, as if someone was leaning over me. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. I just lay there shaking, waiting for whatever it was to do something. Anything. But it didn't. The room stayed silent, but I could still feel it. The weight of it, watching me. At some point I must have passed out from fear because I woke up the next morning with sunlight streaming through the curtains. My body ached, and my face was stiff with dried tears. I sat up slowly, and that's when I saw it. The window was open again, and this time there was something new. A single muddy footprint on the floor, right next to my bed. That was the last straw. I packed a bag and left the apartment that day. I didn't even wait for my lease to end. I didn't care. I stayed with a friend across town for a few months, and when I finally went back to grab my things, the landlord told me no one else would rent the unit after I left. Apparently, tenants before me had left under similar circumstances. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. Tap, tap, tap. And I wonder if it followed me. They say you shouldn't read scary stories late at night. I used to think that was dumb. Now I'm not so sure, because what if the stories are reading you back? I've been a paramedic for 12 years. In those years, I've seen my fair share of horror, not the kind you see in movies, but the kind that leaves an invisible mark on your mind. Accidents, violence, heartbreak. You become numb to it after a while, because you have to. But what I'm about to tell you isn't just about blood and death. It's about something worse, something that makes me doubt reality itself. We don't talk about these experiences much, not among coworkers, not even at home. People wouldn't believe us if we did. This one happened during a cold November night in a small Midwestern town. It was around 2 a.m. when the call came in. Single vehicle accident, 2 occupants, unknown condition. That usually means one of 2 things. The driver lost control after drinking, or someone fell asleep at the wheel. Either way, we were out the door within seconds, sirens piercing the silence of the town. My partner Kyle was driving. He's been in EMS longer than me and doesn't scare easily. I've seen him crack jokes while pulling people from wrecks, but even he didn't say much as we approached the scene. There was something off about the road that night. Fog hung low, as thick as smoke, and the headlights struggled to pierce through it. I'm not superstitious, but I swear I felt eyes watching us from somewhere in that mist. When we finally reached the site, I saw the car first. A black sedan, or what was left of it. It had hit a massive oak tree head-on. The front end was crushed, the hood bent like paper. It was silent except for the faint ticking of metal cooling down. But the strangest thing was the tree. The bark where the car hit was charred black, like it had been burned. "You smell that?" Kyle said, sniffing the air. I did. It wasn't gas or oil. It was something sulfuric like rotten eggs, the kind of smell you'd associate with something dead. It made my stomach turn, but I pushed it down. I had a job to do. We grabbed our gear and rushed to the vehicle. I peered through the shattered window and felt my heart drop. There were two people inside, a man and a woman. The woman was in the passenger seat, her face pale, head tilted awkwardly as if her neck had snapped. The man, slumped over the steering wheel, was eerily still. I tapped on the door. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. Kyle got to work on the driver's side, using the crowbar to pry open the door while I checked the woman. Her eyes were wide open, staring at something above me. I couldn't help but glance up, but there was nothing there. Still, a chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, Kyle swore loudly. "What?" I asked, rushing over. He pointed to the man behind the wheel. "He's cold. Ice cold." It didn't make sense. We just arrived. There was no way the bodies should have been stone cold already. Kyle shook his head and grabbed the man's wrist to check for a pulse, and froze. He just moved. I blinked. "What are you talking about?" His hand. I swear to God it twitched. I looked at the man more closely. He was pale, his lips tinged blue, but there was something about his face. It didn't look relaxed in death. It looked tense, pained, like he'd seen something horrifying in his final moments. I opened my mouth to say something when I noticed the woman's head had turned. She had been looking straight ahead before, but now her face was turned sharply toward me, her unblinking eyes boring into mine. "Kyle, we need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. "What are you talking about? Before he could finish, we heard it. A low groan, like metal scraping against metal. Except it was coming from the tree. We both turned toward it, and I swear on everything I hold dear that I saw a shape standing there. It was tall and thin, its body blending into the blackened bark of the oak. For a split second, it looked like a man, its limbs unnaturally long and crooked, but its face, it had no face. Just smooth, dark skin where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. The smell of sulfur grew stronger. "Get the hell back to the rig," Kyle said, his voice cracking for the first time since I'd known him. We bolted. I don't know how I made it back to the ambulance without falling, but I did. Kyle slammed the doors shut behind us, and we sat there in the cab, panting, hearts racing. I looked back at the crash site through the fog. The car was still there. The bodies were still there. But the thing standing by the tree, it was gone. We radioed dispatch, told them we needed backup. When the police and fire crews arrived 20 minutes later, the scene looked different. The tree wasn't charred anymore, and the bodies, they were still there, but now they were warm, as if they'd only just died. No one believed us about the smell or the figure we saw. The official report said the crash was caused by driver fatigue, and that was that. But Kyle and I both knew the truth. That wasn't the last time I encountered something I couldn't explain. Another time, I was called to an abandoned house. The neighbors had reported screaming coming from inside. When we got there, The house was dark and silent, but the front door was wide open, like it had been waiting for us. I didn't want to go in, but protocol is protocol. Inside, it was freezing, the kind of cold that makes your breath fog even in the middle of summer. The floors creaked under our boots, and the smell of mildew mixed with something sharp, like copper. "You hear that?" my partner asked. At first, I didn't, but then I heard it. Whispers, faint but growing louder. It sounded like a woman's voice, speaking words I couldn't understand. We followed the sound to the basement door. My partner, braver than me, opened it. A rush of cold air hit us, and the whispers stopped. In the silence, I swear I heard breathing coming from the darkness below. "Hello?" I called out. No response. My partner took a step onto the first stair, and that's when we heard it. A blood-curdling scream that echoed up from the basement. It wasn't just loud, it was inhuman, like it came from something that didn't have lungs. We ran. I don't even remember how we got back to the rig, but we did. The police searched the house afterward. They didn't find anyone, but they did find something strange. Symbols carved into the basement walls, symbols they said looked ancient. They didn't ask us to explain what we heard, and we didn't volunteer. People think being a first responder is all about saving lives, and sometimes it is. But there are things we see, things we can't unsee, that make us question everything we know. I've learned that death isn't always the scariest part of this job. Sometimes it's what's waiting around death, lingering in the dark, watching us. And if you're lucky, you'll never see it for yourself. You never forget the feeling of standing in front of a house that shouldn't exist. I've stood in front of more haunted houses than I can count, but there's one in particular, one I can never unsee. It doesn't just haunt my dreams, it follows me in ways I can't explain. This is where my story begins. My name is Daniel Quinn. I'm a 36-year-old freelance journalist who specializes in the paranormal. If there's a house with a reputation for being haunted, chances are I've been there. I've chased urban legends, interviewed terrified families, and slept on dusty floors in abandoned manors to uncover the stories others are too scared to tell. I thought I had seen it all, until I received a cryptic email 2 years ago. The message was short. There's a house in Harrow Ridge, Massachusetts, that doesn't appear on any map. Its history has been buried for decades. Come if you want the truth, but don't stay past midnight. I won't warn you again. Attached was a blurry photo of a sprawling Victorian mansion. The windows were shattered, the paint peeling like skin. I could almost feel the cold seeping from the image. There was no sender name, no contact information, nothing to identify who had reached out to me. It wasn't the first time someone tried to lure me into a haunted house, but something about this email, the way it was worded, the ominous final warning, sent chills up my spine. It felt like bait, and I was the fish. Of course, I went anyway. Harrow Ridge was a small, forgotten town tucked in the shadow of dense New England forests. I arrived in October, just as the trees were shedding their leaves, blanketing the ground in shades of red and gold. The town was eerily quiet, like it existed outside of time. The locals weren't exactly welcoming. When I asked about the house, I was met with blank stares, nervous glances, and one man who gripped my arm so hard his knuckles turned white. "Don't go up there," he muttered, his voice a gravelly whisper. "It doesn't want you there." When I pressed for details, he just shook his head and hurried off. Finding the house wasn't easy. The directions I pieced together from scraps of information led me through a twisting maze of forgotten roads and dense forest trails. My GPS was useless, and I started to wonder if I'd been tricked. But then, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, I saw it. The house. It sat at the end of a long, overgrown path, shrouded in mist like a forgotten secret. The Victorian structure loomed against the darkening sky, its spires reaching upward like skeletal fingers. I parked my car and stared. The email's photo hadn't done it justice. This place breathed malevolence. I grabbed my flashlight, camera, and recorder and walked toward the front porch. The wood creaked under my weight, and a crow perched on the roof let out a piercing cry that made me jump. My heart was already pounding, but I pressed forward. Inside, the house was alive with decay. The air was suffocating, thick with dust, mildew, and something else I couldn't place. I swept my flashlight across the foyer, illuminating faded wallpaper, broken furniture, and a grand staircase that seemed to curve in unnatural ways. I set up my equipment. My recorder, a trusted companion on all my investigations, clicked to life with a soft hum. This is Daniel Quinn, October 21st, 10:14 p.m. I'm inside the Harrow Ridge house. First impressions. Unsettling. The energy here feels heavy, like something's watching me. The words echoed unnaturally in the silence. I moved deeper into the house. The first sign that something was wrong came almost immediately. As I explored the rooms, my flashlight flickered, plunging me into darkness for a few agonizing seconds. I stood frozen, listening. The air felt thick, pressing in on my chest like a weight. When the light came back, I saw it. A shadow. It darted across the hallway just ahead of me. My breath caught in my throat. "Is someone here?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. I followed the shadow, a mistake, I realize now. The hallway led to a room that felt colder than the rest of the house. My flashlight swept across the walls and I froze. The wallpaper, it wasn't wallpaper at all. It was covered in words, hundreds, thousands of words scrawled in black ink, names, dates, desperate pleas for help. I stepped closer, my skin crawling as I read one. "It's under the floor." I took a step back, my shoe scraping against something. I looked down and saw that the wooden floorboards were loose. The smart thing to do would have been to leave, but I didn't. I pried up the floorboard, revealing a narrow, dark crawl space. The air that rushed out smelled like rot. I shone my flashlight inside, and for a second, I thought I saw something move. Something pale and human-shaped, slithering deeper into the darkness. That's when I heard it. A voice. Faint and distant, it echoed through the house, a mournful whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound of it made my blood run cold. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. "No," I whispered. My instincts screamed at me to run. The voice grew louder. I turned and bolted down the hallway. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, like the house itself was mocking me. I made it to the grand staircase when the whispering stopped, and the screaming began. It came from above me, a shrill, inhuman wail that made my knees buckle. I looked up, and for a split second I saw something peering down at me from the second floor. It wasn't human. Its face was smooth and featureless, its skin stretched tight like an old sheet. It was crouched on all fours, watching me with empty hollows where its eyes should have been. I ran. I don't remember getting to my car. I don't remember driving. All I remember is the feeling of that thing's gaze burning into me as I fled. It was aware of me. It didn't want me there, and yet, it didn't let me leave untouched. I checked the recorder the next day, hoping for some explanation. What I heard still keeps me awake at night. The recording started normally. My voice, my footsteps. But then, at exactly 10:44 p.m., there was silence. A full minute of nothing. Then a voice, software whispering. It spoke my name. Daniel. I swear it wasn't my voice, but it sounded just like me. The recorder ended abruptly, like it had been slammed shut. I tried to research the house, but it's like it doesn't exist. There are no records, no deeds, no historical documents. It's as if the house was erased from history, but I know it's real. I saw it. I felt it. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear my name being whispered, no matter where I am, no matter how far I go. Daniel.